In this video, I look at some historic newspaper reports about navvies employed on the Newcastle Emlyn Branch Line. It's a tale of drunkenness, brawling, accidents and a mysterious death. I've previously made a video about the death of a local navvy on the line, so if you haven't seen that, there's a link in the description below this video, or click on this card. This video is about the navvies who came to work on the line from further away. The Newcastle Emlyn Branch Line got its approval in 1881. This was a scheme of the Cardigan and Carmarthen Railway, which the following year was taken over by the Great Western Railway, which bought the necessary land for the line in 1885, but sat on the project for 5 years before it got its act together and appointed a contractor. This piece of news about the line is from May 1890, and it tells us that the man who got the contract to construct it was Mr. Rugby, a Yorkshire gentleman. The line, it tells us, is 6.5 miles long and will take 2 years to construct, requiring a tunnel at Cwm Cafan Gorge, Trebedu cutting and numerous bridges. Mr. Rugby, it tells us, did not intend importing many men, so the local labourer and artisan will find plenty of employment and good pay. The first reports of navvies followed soon after. The Carmarthen Journal reported work had already started on the 2nd of May 1890, with optimism about the local economy due to the influx of engineers, managers, gaffers, navvies, etc. Less positive were the reports of drunkenness. Navvies worked hard and were known to drink hard too. In June 1890, Michael McDalmont got 14 days imprisonment with hard labour for being drunk and disorderly on a highway at Llandysul. That was not all. He was to be back on trial shortly for something referred to here as another charge of a more serious nature, which, in fact, when he appeared in July, was called trivial, theft of a portion of cart harness, and got him a prison sentence of 1 day. He was from Liverpool, one of the imported men. Where John Johnson came from isn't recorded, but he was lodging at Llandysul and fined 5 shillings for drunkenness on the 1st of September 1890. Less than a fortnight later, another navvy lodging at the same place, one George Griffith, was found near Dolhythe in a very drunken state and taken to Newcastle Emlyn lockup, which he shared that night with David Williams, a fellow navvy from Cwmglo near Carnarvon, held for the same reason. It was a Sunday, and Welsh pubs were closed, but they clearly found somewhere supplying drink. In August 1892, Charles Morgans, a navvy from the huts at Trebedu, was found drunk and incapable on the road lying in a ditch. He said he was not drunk, just having a nap. He was fined 5 shillings. Reports of this kind were a regular feature in the newspapers throughout the construction of the line. In 1893, the Newcastle Emlyn police were again concerned with dealing with navvies and drunkenness. In April, a navvies' unlicensed drinking den was discovered in Llandysul at Penddol, supplying the ever-thirsty navvies with beer on a Sunday. English navvies were clearly not appreciative of the Welsh Sunday closing law, and Catherine Webb saw a gap in the market she could easily fill. I'm sure it was initially lucrative, but in the end it cost her a total of £15, 10 shillings and costs when she appeared before the magistrates. The navvies who were present when the police raided were not willing to let the officers seize their 2 18-gallon casks of beer, and a scuffle and some cursing and swearing ensued. Several navvies were charged with obstruction and fined, including George Hicks, also known as Fingers. Navvies typically went by nicknames, and John Walsh, alias John Moore. And it wasn't just the navvies who availed themselves of Mrs. Webb's hospitality. The drinking den had also been providing a service to the local men who fancied an illicit pint. Deprived of this handy illegal local, The navvies had to go to licensed premises to drink, and that wasn't always better. In August of the same year, a brawl broke out at the Pensarnay Arms between Newcastle Emlyn and Llan. George Owen stabbed William Bradley with a pocket knife. Both were navvies. By the time Owen came up before the quarter sessions, he'd been in prison for 2 months already. He was sentenced to 1 month in prison with hard labour. It's not entirely surprising that the initial delight expressed in the press at the influx of railway workers quickly evaporated. The contractor's optimistic claims that the line would be complete in 2 years and that much imported labour was not needed proved untrue. In the Lampeter-based Welsh-language weekly newspaper Y Brython Cymraeg, in January 1892, the work is reported to be delayed by the wet Welsh weather, and hundreds of imported navvies were now required. The navvies were encamped at Trebedu, near the stretch of the line that required a large cutting. By then, Trebedu had its own policemen to try and keep the navvies in order, but the author of the article was not happy about the presence of this loud and drunken workforce in its squalid huts, and hopes they do nothing too bad in the area. He claims they live in the huts because no respectable people would have them in their houses, but navvy camps like this were typical. There wasn't enough accommodation elsewhere otherwise, though some did lodge locally instead, presumably in very unrespectable houses. One such was Thomas Neal, who lodged at Pentracourt with a woman named Dinah. We aren't given her real name. Apparently she's no better than she should have been. He was a 35-year-old widower, and in January 1893 she found him dead in bed. Apart from the continual drinking and swearing and the occasional appearance before the magistrates, the navvies were more of a danger to themselves than to the locals. They were famously bold, risk-takers, with as much disdain for health and safety as their masters, if not more so. Accidents were inevitable, though the only navvy actually killed in the construction of the line was a local man. See my other video for that. The experienced imported navvies also met with misfortune and death. In March 1892, the work which had started 2 years earlier and was to have been finished by then, had only got about halfway. The level of the line at Llancoed had to be lowered due to miscalculation, and the contractor was now a Mr. Jones. The original contractor, Mr. Rugby, had apparently given it up as a bad job. Mr. Jones was confident it would be complete in 15 months, certainly no later than 18 months. A temporary bridge was being constructed over the Teivi at Athcavan, so materials could be conveyed to Trebedu, which suggests they had dug the Athcavan tunnel by this point. 250 men were reported to be working on the line. In October, some 5 months later, Evan Evans, a shoemaker, and Henry Davis, a weaver, were walking on the banks of the River Teivi near Athcavan Bridge, enjoying a Sunday afternoon stroll. Where the Sheddy joins the Teivi there was a whirlpool, and going round in that whirlpool was what they thought at first was a dead sheep. When they realised it was a human body, they dragged it to the bank and sent for the police. P.C. Jones of Drevach arrived some 4 or 5 hours later, and the body was taken to the cowhouse at the Place Parquet Inn and examined. The newspaper reports went into very gory details which I'll spare you. They did not shrink from the sensational, lurid and explicit details of injuries and so on in the late Victorian press, but the remains wore a handkerchief round the neck, woolen socks, strong nail boots and a leather belt like that worn by navvies. A doctor examined the body. Examinations were often not very extensive at this time, more of just a look over rather than a full post-mortem. He thought it had been in the river for about 3 months, and that it was that of a man aged about 60, about 5'7" or 8, and about 11 or 12 stone. As no one seems to have been reported missing at the time in the area, the coroner was content to get the matter out of the way with an open verdict and leave it there. The newspaper report was not so open-minded, saying, "There can be little doubt that the deceased was one of the navvies who are engaged in the extension of the Llandysul line to Newcastle Emlyn. How he came by his death cannot, of course, be explained. The deceased evidently being a stranger to the neighbourhood, it is quite possible that the deceased missed his way and falling into the river was drowned." Indeed, it is possible, especially if he fell from the temporary bridge when he was drunk, but no effort was made to identify him nor to trace his family. Navvies came, navvies went. No one much cared. In July 1893, it was reported that unforeseen engineering difficulties meant that the line was still not progressing much past Trebedu, and the work will not be finished by August as expected, and it is not supposed that the line will be ready for traffic until early next year. In December 1893, young James Jones was working on the line at Trebedu. He was not a resident of the navvy camp, but lodged at Lincoln Street, Llandysul. A trolley derailed and its load of new rails fell off and landed on his ankle, crushing it. The line to Trebedu was complete enough for an engine to run, and this conveyed him back to Llandysul, where he was attended by a doctor, but he probably never went back to work. At this time, employers were required to pay for medical costs, but his working days were probably over, and he would not have received adequate compensation for that. By the middle of January 1894, the line had got a bit nearer to Newcastle Emlyn, but still wasn't open. A temporary bridge had been constructed over the Teivi near Llandysul, and there a navvy called Joseph Prosser met his unfortunate end. He and two other navvies were crossing it on the night of Saturday, January the 20th, probably after a visit to a hostelry, when he fell or was blown off it by the wind. He drowned, and his body had not been recovered by the time the story went to press. I don't know if it ever was. The line finally opened to traffic in July 1895, 5 years after work had started and well after all its deadlines had passed. 2,000 people had a free tea in the Corridor Hall, and a grand banquet was held at the Emlyn Arms Hotel. The town was decorated, and it rained heavily. I wonder if, during the festivities that marked the day that the railway came to Newcastle Emlyn, anyone spared a thought for the sweat and blood shed by the navvies in making it all possible. Probably not. If they thought of the navvies at all, it was probably just to be glad they'd tramped off to find some more work somewhere else. I hope you found the story of the navvies interesting. Please remember to hit the like button and consider subscribing to my channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.